What's up, sports rehab experts? Today we're going to be talking about the Nordic hamstring exercise. Everything you would ever want to know about this exercise as it relates to rehab clinicians or as it relates to strength and conditioning professionals. How to apply it in your scenario, when, why you would use it, and then also some common misconceptions that people will associate with this exercise as well too. So first and foremost, we need to just kind of make sure everybody knows what we're talking about with the Nordic hamstring exercise, because you will see a lot of people set this activity up wrong, and there's some different variations of it too. So in and of itself, what is shown in the research anyways, what a true Nordic hamstring exercise is when someone's kneeling on the ground, someone is holding the feet down flat on the ground, and then the individual is trying to use their hamstrings to essentially hold them up and resist the urge from gravity to fall forward. So as they lean forward, the knee goes from a flex position in that tall kneeling position, from a flex position to a more extended position. Gravity and the longer lever arm is going to start applying a load, and usually at some point in time around 45 degrees, it becomes significantly harder for the individual to control, and you'll see them kind of fall to the ground. But the whole time, the individual is trying to fight as hard as they can to prevent themselves from falling to the earth, and they're using their hamstrings eccentrically to be able to control that fall down to the ground. So it's not a true free fall because the hamstrings are being active the entire time, or at least that's the intent of it. Now, some common things you'll see with this is people also trying to perform this in a glute ham raise machine. So I just want to show the difference between what a glute ham raise machine is and what a Nordic is. So there's a difference in where your knee position is. So if you look at a glute ham machine setup here, and if you're viewing this on YouTube, it's going to be easy for you to see because it's right here. If it's on the podcast, it's going to be a little bit harder, so you might have to do some Googling as far as what these pieces of equipment is if you're not familiar with it. But anyways, glute ham machine, you'll see when you set this individual up on a glute ham machine that the knees are lower on the pad, so the more thigh contact you're going to have with that glute ham raise machine. So what that does is it changes the fulcrum that you're rotating about. So if we were doing a true Nordic, that would essentially be the same as if you were kneeling right on the center pad of that glute ham raise machine. Now, if you were to do that, a lot of people will perform that extremely poorly, or the athlete will be almost afraid to just do the exercise because the glute ham raise machine takes you so much higher up off of the ground. So now you have to look really down far to the ground, and it can be intimidating for some people to do this, especially if they're kneeling right in the center pad. And again, that center pad forces that fulcrum to change. It creates a longer lever arm, it creates more load, and it's a lot harder for people to control. So a glute ham raise done is actually much easier than a Nordic exercise. Now, the intent of a Nordic is to be supramaximal. So what that means is it means that at some point in time you should fail. And that's where we get this falling effect to the ground when you see someone doing a Nordic hamstring curl. Because at some point in time, the amount of load that is applied there reaches a point that is greater than what you can withstand, and that's what we call supramaximal. Now, individuals who can just go up and down all day long, or they can control that exercise all day long, you're doing more of a glute ham raise, more so than you are a Nordic hamstring exercise, because again, the Nordic hamstring exercise, its intent was to be supramaximal. You should fall to the earth, and then you either use a push-up to kind of use your arms to throw yourself back up, to assist you back up, or you just kind of fold at the waist, kind of reset yourself, and then control the fall or control the lowering back down to the ground. So that's the main difference between a GHR eccentric hamstring exercise versus the Nordic hamstring exercise, and that supramaximal is really what you're trying to go for with it, and that's what's going to really drive some of the tissue adaptation that you're looking for from the exercise. So it's important that we train this exercise in a supramaximal fashion to really stress the hamstring and the hamstring tendon in an eccentric fashion to create that lengthening effect within the muscle, but also to create more resiliency in the muscle and the tendon insertion points as well too. So that's going to help us with resistance against injury. So training in that supramaximal fashion. Now that doesn't mean that we can't use the glute ham raise to our advantage to get somebody stronger. So very similar to if you were trying to try to build up a squat or build up your bench press, it's not a bad idea to perform some supramaximal loads or some eccentrics in the squatting pattern or in the bench pressing pattern. So to relate it to a different movement, a lot of people will use pins in the squat or what's called the weight releasers in a squat. So they can put heavier weight on their back, squat down, control the eccentric, and then the weight releasers fall off or they hit the pins and somebody helps assist them back up and they can perform a supramaximal load in that fashion, because we're always stronger more eccentrically than we are concentrically. So we're going to be able to control a heavier weight eccentrically than what we would be able to concentrically reverse back out of the bottom of a squat, or just say reverse back up during like a bicep curl. So we're going to be stronger holding the weight, controlling that weight down into the lengthened position down to the ground in a bicep curl, versus what we'd then be able to reverse out of and then concentrically lift. So same thing with the bench press. You put whatever you say your max bench press is, you can go a little bit heavier than that and control that down to your chest, but then you're going to need some pins at the bottom or somebody to help assist you back up, or some type of releaser at that point in time too. So say you have chains on this is why chains become a useful thing for a bench press, is because as you go down to the ground, if that chain is long enough, or if you have a band attached to it, some of that resistance is lifted off of that chain, or the resistance and that tension is taken off of the band as you get closer to the chest. So you can actually overload somebody from that standpoint as they control the weight down. So we're trying to accomplish the same thing, just directly to the muscle tissue in and of itself with a hamstring exercise. So that hamstring exercise, that's why we would perform that supramaximally, and that's how the Nordic hamstring should be intended. Now, if you can do a Nordic hamstring, and you will see some people who can do this, it's not overly common, but you can see people who just can go up and down, control whatever position they want to in that Nordic hamstring exercise. They need to find a way to make that exercise more challenging, because again, the purpose of the Nordic hamstring is to be a supramaximal load. So what then you would do is then progress that individual to a single leg hold, where they perform that Nordic hamstring exercise again, and try to help hold themselves or resist that feeling of falling, and try to control that as best as they can down to the earth. Now likely if you can do it with one leg, let alone if someone who can do the Nordic hamstring exercise with two legs competently, and do a number of different reps with it, likely that individual has pretty strong hamstrings to begin with, and the chances of them having a hamstring strain because of a hamstring strength issue is likely minimal. What more than likely that hamstring strain would occur was your failure to prepare for the specific activity at hand, which generally is running, stopping, changing direction as it relates to sport. So that individual probably needs to work on, sprint technique, change of direction technique, some different form running, the ability to be fluid in and out of cuts, fluid when they're sprinting at top end speeds, as opposed to this kind of really stiff, rigid weightlifter who would be running. They look very different than a high level sprinter who stays very fluid as they move their legs in and out. Some of the best sprinters are not necessarily always the strongest athletes. A lot of sprinters are very strong, but sprinters also need the ability to relax the muscle on a moment's notice, and allow their extremities to cycle through back and forth and then contract again on a moment's notice and create co-contraction and stiffness when they hit the ground. So there's a lot of timing that's involved in the sprinting activity. That's beyond the scope of this video here, but just keep that in mind. If this individual has a decent amount of strength with the Nordic hamstring exercise, the purpose of doing this was to build resiliency in the first place, so you don't really have to worry about injuries, but people still do get injured and are very strong with the Nordic hamstring exercise. So then there's something else that you're going to want to consider, and a lot of times that's something specific to the task of sprinting and technique, as it relates to that sport or just sprinting in general, being able to stay relaxed and fluid. But getting back to the exercise, I mentioned how if we're trying to build strength in a squat or a bench press, we might use a supramaximal exercise, such as that eccentric overload. Same concept that we're trying to accomplish with the Nordic hamstring exercise. But what you'll also do is you'll train that same exercise in a very typical isotonic fashion. So pick a weight that's 70 to 80% of their 1 repetition maximum, and then lift the weight up and down at a normal tempo pace. So that's still what the glute ham raise machine is beneficial for, is allowing you to get more exposure to a similar activity, but not at the same supramaximal load. And then we can actually perform this exercise isotonically, get more repetitions under our belt, build more strength hypertrophy that way, which then will allow it to transfer a little bit more over into the Nordic hamstring exercise and get you to be able to control more range of motion of that Nordic hamstring exercise before it feels like you're going to fall down, or even allow you to progress yourself from 2 legs to some resemblance of a single leg Nordic hamstring exercise too. So that's the purpose of doing the GHR hamstring exercise too, is to make it easier, alter the lever arm a little bit, put more contact on the thigh, change the fulcrum, and allow you to do more up and down repetitions and build some strength hypertrophy that way. And then in the same training block or a different training block, go back to the Nordic hamstring exercise, and you should notice some changes in your ability to perform that exercise more optimally, or for more repetitions, or feel like again you can hold that contraction for a longer period of time before you're going to fall to the ground. Now finally, there's ways to modify the actual Nordic hamstring exercise itself. Again, the idea is that this exercise is always done in a supramaximal form. So if you add you'll see people use like a band around a squat rack and hold on to the band as they lower themselves down. That is one way of modifying it, but that way of modifying it, you're then trying to then perform the exercise isotonically. So that would actually be a modification to the GHR version of the exercise. So if you're doing that, just realize your intent of it, and if you have a GHR machine available to you, you might as well just do the GHR isotonic exercise as opposed to doing the Nordic hamstring exercise with that assist. What you can do with the Nordic hamstring exercise is, again, a lot of our ability with exercise is very specific to the task at hand. So what we can do is shorten the lever arm by allowing the athlete to fold at the waist a little bit. So the purpose of the exercise is to, again, always be super maximal. So it shouldn't ever reach the point where they can go up and down with the activity. They should have to completely unload the activity and restart the activity and perform it over again. So if you're, again, doing the exercise back and forth, up and down all the time, you're really not actually getting that super maximal eccentric activation of the musculature that you're looking for. So just be aware of that. So a lot of times what I'll have athletes do is just start more in that hips flex position and kind of lurch their body weight outward, and try to go from short lever arm to long lever arm, and then you reach that point of super maximal where you can't hold any longer, and then you'll fall to the ground. So that's one way of doing it there, but the intent is to always perform the exercise eventually as it's intended, which would be then to do it upright, vertical, longest lever arm possible, and control that down to the ground as best you can. Again, fully realizing that at some point in time, the load is going to exceed your capacity to be able to hold it. So whether that's 2 legs or single leg, you're going to reach a point of where you have to fall to the ground while you're still fighting as much as you can. Don't just give up, but you're still fighting through the exercise and trying to get as much hamstring strength through that range of motion as possible. Okay, so to summarize, you don't need a ton of different variations of this exercise to be doing it. We show here a variety of different ways that you can do it at home on your own. You don't need somebody holding down on your feet. You can use a barbell and put 45-pound plates on either side and let the barbell be on the ground. And then you're just lifting your heels up into the bar and then allowing yourself to go down in that fashion. Now, one thing you have to be cautious of if the bar is, the weights are on the ground, is that the weights can roll back and forth. You obviously want a heavy enough weight so that the weight doesn't actually, in the bar, doesn't actually lift off the ground. But if the weights are on the ground, they can roll back and forth too, so you have to be kind of cautious of that. You might put another plate in front of the weights just so it doesn't roll forward as you perform the exercise. So that's something to just consider if the weights are on the ground, if you're doing it by yourself. One way to avoid that is put the weight into a squat rack and go to the very, very bottom of those J hooks. And that's the video that you see here showing. And the weight's a little bit higher off the ground. That bar is a little bit higher off the ground, so it's a little bit more awkward because you have to lift your heels and feet higher up off the ground. So it's a little bit more awkward to perform from that standpoint. But the positive of it is you alleviate the tendency for the bar to want to roll forward and backwards. So again, if you can get the bar to rest straight flat on the ground, it doesn't want to lift up, it doesn't want to roll back and forth, that's probably the best way, the best alternative to someone just holding your heels down. Again, if you don't feel comfortable with that, a nice alternative to that is just put the bar into the squat rack. So that's your different variations of doing the Nordic hamstring, no matter what setup you have or any type of assist from a partner that you may have. You don't need a partner to do the exercise. You can do it in the weight room. I've even seen people do it off of a pull down machine too, where your thighs would kind of be on the pull down, right where your thighs would be resting on that machine. So your knees will be where you sit, your heels will be where your thighs would be on a normal pull down machine. I got a picture here showing on the YouTube video. Again, at the podcast, you're just gonna have to kind of use your imagination or Google it, but you can put your heels into that thigh rest and then perform the Nordic there. It is a Nordic hamstring exercise because your knees are on the mat, versus the GHR, your knees are before the mat and your thigh comes in contact with the mat. So again, that changes the fulcrum slightly. The reason why you don't do it on a GHR, typical Nordic, with your knees on top of it is because a lot of times athletes who are learning of it, because you're so high up off the ground, it's kind of intimidating and they don't necessarily want to perform the exercise, or they really kind of fold up, curl up as they do the exercise, and you're really not getting much benefit out of it. Plus, again, the Nordic is to be a supramaximal exercise, so after you reach that point in time where gravity gets the best of you and you kind of go to the ground, if you're on the Nordic, then it's harder to just get yourself all the way back up and restart the exercise, versus if you do it from the ground, you can just kind of push yourself back up and do the exercise that way. So just keep it in mind what the differences are between those two. Again, it's not a problem to include both of them. The GHR is more from an isotonic standpoint, where you're just trying to perform multiple sets, reps, time under tension there. The Nordic, the true Nordic, is a supramaximal exercise that at some point in time you should fail as you're going down. So just keep that in mind as you're programming with it. Both are perfectly fine to program for your athletes. But if you're reading the research papers and think you're applying the Nordics but not actually doing a true Nordic, you may not be getting as much benefit out of that hamstring activity as what you could be if you perform it in the way that it's intended. Hey, thanks for watching. Hope you got a lot out of the information in today's video. If you like this type of content, if you could do us a huge favor by liking the channel, subscribing to the channel, and hit that alert button so you get notified when any new videos come out your way. Also, if you're a rehab clinician looking to take your clinical skill knowledge to the next level and seeing how you can better help your patients, visit sportsrehabexpert.com, where we got a lot more information that can help you along the way, as well as our Certified Sports Rehab Expert course. This is 2 courses that give you a sports rehab residency or an orthopedic fellowship type education in half the time at a fraction of the cost. So visit sportsrehabexpert.com to check out these two courses. We have the Human Assessment Mastery course and the Full Body Treatment Domination course. And finally, maybe you aren't a rehab clinician watching this video. Maybe you're someone just looking to keep an active, healthy, mobile, athletic lifestyle without painkillers and frequent visits to the doctor's office. If you're located in Ann Arbor, Michigan, you're in luck. Just visit annarbor.physio and you can set up your appointment today. If you're not from around the Ann Arbor or the Michigan area, no worries. We do a lot of online video consultation services from people all over the globe as well too. So you can reach us at annarbor.physio or at sportsrehabexpert.com, and we'd love to learn more about how we can help you out.